Yeah, I think a week ago, a lot of us didn't quite expect this degree of intensity in terms of the financial escalation. So I think we sort of have seen sanctions in place since 2014. The Russian people have lived beside them. They've adapted. Russian financial institutions have adapted. And just a week ago, I think we expected that same thing to continue, just a ramping up and an expanding of those sanctions. But on the weekend, these were really escalated far beyond what we expected. So the financial institutions in Russia were cut off from a key messaging platform that allows transactions to occur. The central bank's foreign assets were frozen. And those two measures, when the markets opened on Monday, had a massive effect, with the ruble falling 30%, which is one of the largest falls in history and certainly to a record low. And you see even on Sunday morning in Russia, people lining up down the street at ATMs to pull foreign currency out in advance of this sort of crisis occurring.
Have you ever seen such cohesion? I mean, we've even seen Switzerland freezing Russian assets. That's almost unheard of. Giants like BP and Shell cutting their losses and exiting Russia. This could change the Russian economy forever.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I think the West is rightly concerned about military action, right? I mean, Russia is a nuclear power. No one wants to engage Russia militarily for fear that there'll be an escalation. So we've had to rely on a sort of economic warfare instead. Now, this has been done before in certain isolated circumstances in Iran, Venezuela, Afghanistan. But for a country of Russia's scale, in terms of its importance in the global economy, in terms of its population, this is really unprecedented. And there was an article in the Washington Post just yesterday that said Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine, his personal appeal to the European leaders swayed them to get on board. And I think this is exactly what we needed, at least to put maximum pressure on Russia to sort of find a way out of the crisis.
Is there any way the Russian people themselves can be protected in any way?
Look, it's a bit perverse because the sanctions to date have mostly focused on the upper echelon of Russian society, oligarchs, the leadership. They're usually pretty targeted. Unfortunately, the reason the sanctions are so effective this time is because they reach straight through the, beyond the oligarchs to the Russian people, right? So if you have a run on the Russian banking system, if the value of the ruble plummets, that's going to have real effects on real people, right? We're going to see mass unemployment. We're going to see huge economic impacts. The value of people's savings will plummet as we see interest rates went from 9.5% to 20%. And we already see that flowing through to mortgage interest rates around 20%. So this is going to have a real profound impact on the Russian people. And unfortunately, that's the point, right? The idea is to try and make that pain as broadly felt as possible to try and maximize the pressure on the Russian government.
Yeah. The next step is potentially shutting down the central bank. What will happen? How worse could it get for Russia if that is targeted?
Yeah, so what we've seen so far, the Russian central bank, like all central banks, including the RBA in Australia, they keep they have large foreign exchange reserves. So they own foreign currency and gold, and they usually store that across the world. So this is the kind of unprecedented part of this package is targeting those foreign reserves. We usually think of central banks as kind of sacrosanct, right? We don't touch them. But so the Russian central bank has something like $600 billion of foreign reserves across the world, and we've effectively frozen something like 40% of that. So that's taken away the ability of the Russian central bank to kind of fund a lot of the things that it needs to fund to deal with this financial crisis. So they could go further, right? There are all sorts of things that could be on the table still. They mainly relate to targeting things the Russian economy needs for its financial lifeline, like oil, gas, fertilizer. But going after those parts of the economy will involve much higher costs for the West while inflicting maximum pain on Russia.
So let's talk about the pain for the West. I mean, Putin has threatened retaliation. We know, of course, the markets are also right across the world are feeling the pain of all of this as well. But how much further pain can Russia actually inflict economically?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, there are strong parallels to the military conflict, right? I mean, you can escalate the military conflict. That will result in retaliation. So the financial conflict is the same. So Putin has, they export a huge, highly valuable volume of things. They export gas, oil, things that the European Union, other countries need desperately, right? So it's freezing in Europe at the moment. So cutting off the gas supply would be hugely damaging, and not to mention, big economic impacts on the West, particularly at a time when inflation is a problem, right? Skyrocketing resource prices aren't going to help that. So they have that tool at their disposal. They could limit exports of those commodities, for example. But the trouble is they need those commodities to continue to fund their war effort, their deficit, all sorts of other things. So they have this sort of financial lifeline of these commodities still coming in, despite the sanctions on other things. And so the question is, who sort of blinks? Yeah. Does the West, because the West could do the same. The West could say, no, we have a trade embargo. We're not going to accept your oil and gas, right? Which would cripple the Russian economy. So we are in this sort of standoff at the moment, not quite knowing how long this initial phase will go and when and if the sanctions will be further escalated by either side.
Yeah, and tonight the Kremlin has said that they will not be moved by sanctions, and we've seen sanctions applied over the last number of years. These are game changers, do you expect? I mean, this is a political question. Do you think these types of sanctions could be the difference?
That's the problem, right? So I'm skeptical that the targeting of the oligarchs is going to do much, because they're actually not that powerful in the scheme of the Russian government. The question is, will there be some kind of mass uprising? Will these economic sanctions, especially if they're expanded further, will they create so much pain and disquiet in a broad swathe of the Russian population, to the extent that puts pressure on Putin? Now, I'm an economist. I'm not an expert in Russian politics. So to know exactly how much pressure that will put on them and whether it will work, it remains to be seen.
Great to chat, Stephen. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Ben.